Hello everyone and welcome to our session today, One Nurse's Trash is Another's Treasure, How to Reward Nurses When in Charge. Our presenter is Nicole Nash-Arnold. Nicole is a nursing career coach who helps great nurses transform into respected leaders. She shares her 15 years of experience in both senior and executive health leadership roles to germinate great leadership. Clinically, Nicole has over 10 years perioperative experience before moving into her nurse educator and management roles. Currently, she manages a privately owned emergency department in Brisbane. Nicole has postgraduate qualifications in perioperative nursing and currently a master's in nursing. Nicole is a member of the International Coaches Federation. Nicole, welcome to the microphone.
Thanks very much for that, Sue. Today I'm going to go through really some principles about how best to motivate your nurses, how best to recognise, how best to reward them, and how different people thrive on different things, hence the premise that one nurse's trash is another nurse's treasure. Not everybody responds in the same way to the rewards, motivation, feedback strategies, communication styles that your preferences are, and to think more broadly about how different people function and how you can best motivate, give them feedback and reward and thank them. Really, it's about when we started as senior nurses and we started in a team leading role, the shift coordinating role, associate nurse manager role perhaps, some sort of leadership function. Maybe we're a new nurse manager or been managing for a while and we're getting the management functions under control, but we're starting to look more broadly about how to motivate our team and thank them. It becomes pretty quickly that nowhere in your orientation, particularly when you're a new team leader or shift coordinator, did anyone talk to you about how best to motivate staff? You were certainly taught how to allocate staff, certainly talk about the case mix, the patients that you're going to have, the skill mix that you need to meet the needs of your patients on any given shift. You know intuitively that you need to manage tea breaks, that you have to look after doctor's rounds perhaps, that you have to look after overtime, reduce overtime, that when you're managing an afternoon shift and someone calls in on a night duty and that they're sick, then you need to start how to cover that sick leave. You learn that who you need to communicate with, like the after hours coordinator, and when to call your NUM after hours. But the things that you're not necessarily taught and that you learn on the job as you go is how you get a stubborn nurse to tea on time. How do you find a way to get a good nurse to use her exceptional communication skills and the fact that she can talk under wet cement for good and not evil? How you might get a nurse who's already got a massive clinical load to take yet another patient that you've just got from ED. You're not necessarily taught how to say thank you to people without it being just an empty platitude. And how you might reward staff in an industry where perks are few and far between. We're certainly not the Wolf of Wall Street where there might be long, fabulous lunches in great restaurants or sailing boats to borrow off the owner for the weekend. So that's what we're going to do through this, is we're going to explore some techniques about how you can understand how different individuals work, what really presses their buttons and ticks their buttons and their boxes. And most importantly, one of the things is how to say thanks to people with a broader repertoire than just, thanks for your help this evening, great shift. So the first thing that we're going to look at is motivating theories. There's many theories about motivating staff, and we'll go through two of the main ones that I think are most relevant to nurses and the most functional for you to be able to use her. Pygmalion effect to start with. This is something that you can start thinking about how your expectations of other people can influence and motivate their performance. It's a setting of high standard. If you set a high standard, not an excessive standard, not something that's unachievable, but if you have high expectations of people, then the theory goes that that in itself motivates better performance. So you can think about this in the context of school, so the teacher and the student. So teachers have their opinions about their students in primary school, and they've got some good students and they've got some not so great students. And there was some research around that indicated that students who have a sense that they were expected to perform well by their teacher and that their teacher had a good opinion of how they functioned as a student, they usually do. They usually have a higher performance, and the research indicated that their performance was high on that basis of expectation alone. And that those students that the teachers had expressed, maybe subtly or not so subtly, that the student was poor and that they were a poor performer and a not so great student, often were linked to poorer outcomes. And intuitively, I think for the most part, you can see how that could happen. When you cast your mind back to when you were at school, you can see how that situation might develop, where that you want to please your teacher and they think you can do it and they think that you're capable of it, and you don't want to disappoint. So you work maybe 10, 20% harder to make sure that you really keep that expectation up. Whereas if you're a poor student and your teacher thinks, they're rubbish at these computer skills and you're never going to get it, and you think, okay, well, fine then, I won't bother trying. So you can see intuitively how that might work, and that extends to all facets of life, not just at school. And the Pygmalion effect is something that happens everywhere. So, for example, if you think about your ward, it's a medical surgical ward and you've taken a couple of new grads. And if the team collaboratively, if that nursing collective thinks, pretty generally speaking, that graduate number one is a pretty rubbish grad, then those expectations and that opinion is intuitively felt by that graduate. And unintentionally, the nursing collective, maybe the team leaders, the clinical nurses and the more experienced senior nurses, unintentionally can show low expectation, and you show that through how you allocate your patients to that grad that you think is a rubbish grad. You give them the less interesting cases and the less interesting patients, and you certainly give them the less challenging patients. The very low acuity patients are given to that grad. And obviously you're trying to meet the needs of the grad and their capabilities and making sure that the patients are safe. So it's not a bad strategy, but you are unintentionally showing your bias in terms of your level of expectation of that student, of that graduate. As that goes on, then they feel less support, they get less praise, they feel undervalued, they feel untrusted, their confidence depletes, their performance drops, their patient allocations get lower and lower acuity, and the cycle continues. It's the exact same thing as the student where the teacher has made it known that they think they're pretty rubbish and they think, okay, well, I'm rubbish and I can't do it. There's a vicious cycle that starts to enact, as opposed to the Pygmalion effect in the reverse way, where the nursing collective and that ward has got a star grad, just a cracker. Nothing you throw at her, she is fazed by. And the exact opposite happens where their boundaries and their capabilities are slowly pushed. And those things are unintentionally shown again in the way in which you allocate patients, that the more interesting patients are given to them, the more complex, the riskier ones, the more unstable, and you're slowly creeping their boundaries as a team leader to see how they're going to perform and whether they can cope with it. Those sorts of things get around. Everyone's impressed that they could look after that unstable PE that was in the ward last week, and there's a bit of tea room chat about it, and then word gets around and someone might come up to them and say, hey, I heard you looked after that really unstable PE the other day. Well done, nice work. Patient allocations, acuity, complexity Interest levels start to ramp for that grad. Feedback continues. Their confidence ramps accordingly. That performance escalates as well, and the Pygmalion effect slowly has an impact on the way in which they perform and the way that they escalate. It's the exact same situation as when the agency nurse comes on, and wards have a habit of giving them the patients that are problematic and difficult, and no one really wants them, and then wonder why the agencies don't perform very well. It's the exact same concept as the Pygmalion effect. There's a practical way in which you can use that. Once you have a concept that that Pygmalion effect is a real, genuine thing, and it's set by your expectations and those subliminal messages that you're sending, then you can use that for good instead of evil. And there's a fairly simple way that we can do that. This is a pretty simple box. It's a matrix that is used in a number of different ways. We can, measure the way in which we measure risk, the way in which we do lots and lots of things. But it's simply a matter of you starting to think about each individual on your ward when you're in charge. And along this axis is your expectations. Your expectations are low through to high. And on this axis are your performance, is the given person's performance. Again, low, high. And it's a matter of just graphing, and you can do this pen to paper, or you can do this intuitively as you go, but it's about plotting where you think people's performance are, and as opposed to your expectations, and then we'll walk through what you do with that information. So let's take a couple of examples. Nurse A. We'll carry on with the grad exercise. So your rubbish grad. Your expectation of this person over the last period of time has been that they're not great, that they have not been a very good grad. So you have pretty low expectations of that. So what you have to ask yourself is question one, for this rubbish grad, what is it that you're expecting of them? You're not expecting a lot. Question two, for the last 3 patient allocations that you gave them, what were the outcomes like? So genuinely have a look. So say you gave them a patient who was a pre-placement nursing home patient that didn't do well after their surgery, and they can't go home, and it looks like they're going to have to go into some sort of facility long term. So they're well outside their post-operative phase, and they're really just a full nursing care without any real risk. So you've given them intuitively something that is not very demanding, but when you have a look at where they have actually performed, what was the outcome? What would be your outcome for that patient? That they were well cared for, that their nursing cares, their basic cares were met, that they had good mouth care, that their pressure areas were looked after, that they were mobilised, they were fed well, all of those things. Did this grad do that? For the purpose of this exercise, we're going to say yes. So the performance was okay to high. Your expectations were low. They sit in that box. Let's take Nurse B, the cracker grad. Same questions. What did you expect? You've got high expectations from them because over the period of time they've been with you, they've done well. So your expectations are high. And when you have a look at what their last patient was, let's say that their last patient was that unstable PE that they looked after, and they managed it beautifully. So again, high. High performance, high expectations. If we extend that now outside the grad, and maybe in another situation you've got another RN. They've been out for 4 years, they've come to your ward, and they're a brand new staff member. So you're in that phase where you're trying to work out whether what they say they can do matches what they actually can do. So you've given them a day 3 FemPop bypass. And your expectations are medium to low. You haven't been all that impressed to date with their performance given what they should be able to do after what they have said that they can do. When you gave them that FemPop bypass in the last 3 patients, their performance was actually pretty disappointing. They missed some key cues for the way in which that patient was deteriorating, and they didn't meet the basic needs of the patient and the basic cares. So their performance was pretty low. So you've slotted them in this box. Another RN. She's 10 years out. She's been on the ward forever. She's always a high performer. Her knowledge is really, really exceptional. So your expectations based on your history is that her performance will be high. But on this particular occasion, the last 3 shifts that you've worked with her, it has not been very good. For some reason, she's really dropped the ball. You're not sure why, but the performance actually sits down here. So you've got a myriad of particular people about how they're performing on a given day based on what your expectations and the actual performance was. So what are you going to do with that? For each of those 4 boxes, there's a respective way in which you can deal with that. So we walk through each of them. This is where we put you what you thought was your rubbish grad. And actually when you look back at how they've performed in the last few things, then it demonstrates that actually their performance isn't too bad. And this is the box that's actually called the self-motivated performer. So despite you having absolutely no confidence in their ability, she's actually done quite well. And if you look back on the last little while and really think back to the last, say, not the last 3 allocations, but the last month's allocations when you've worked with her, her outcomes actually have been, and her performance actually has been more medium to high than what you had thought it would be. So maybe it's time to start adjusting your expectations. What you need to be really careful about this box is that the self-motivated performer can be where your star performers are. They're the diamonds in the rough. And they're definitely a group where you need to start signalling your positive expectations in terms of that Pygmalion effect and provide loads of recognition to start to motivate them. They've got loads and loads of potential. So let's next take a look at your cracker grad, who you had high expectation and she's delivered. No surprises here, she sits in the high performers box. They will meet your expectations and they're continuously improving their performance. They're often an example of where your expectations are subtly motivating their performance. They're a classic example of where you're slowly building them and you're slowly nudging your expectations and you're slowly, subtly sending subliminal messages about what their capacity is and you're building their capacity. The warning with these guys is just because they're sailing doesn't mean that you necessarily cut the umbilical cord. You've got to keep that positive cycle going of high expectations feeding the high performance. Now that new staff member that's been out 4 or 5 years that you think should have a fairly solid capability of working well, but actually you're starting to drop your expectations and her performance is matching it, no surprises, low performer box. So you've expected poor performance and they've performed poorly. There is potential for that vicious cycle where you're subtly motivating, demotivating strategies and thoughts and processes in that individual by those expectations. You need to ask yourself with this particular person, and honestly it's not everybody, but you have to honestly ask yourself if you expected more, could you motivate high performance? Are you one of those people that you could actually nudge forward simply by raising the bar of the expectation and they follow, the Pygmalion effect? And start thinking about how could you signal higher expectations. Finally, the 4th box is the underperformer. So that's the 10-year RN that's been around. She's solid, she's reliable, you know who she is, what she's about, and yet the last 3 times you've given her something to do, then the wheels have fallen off. So for some reason they're not a poor performer or a low performer, but they are currently underperforming. And when they've got a good history and they've developed your trust and your expectations, yet they're not delivering all of a sudden, then you need to start asking yourself what's gone on. Why have they dropped the bundle? And it's time to take some time out to consider what's really going on here. Is it something going on at home? Is there a work conflict that's going on? And not necessarily will you have the right authority or the ability to delve into that, but it is the situation where it's right for you to explore or consider the fact that there's more going on than just performance and expectations. And if you're not the right person to have that conversation about what's going on, then it is something that you should escalate to the manager to say, you know, Joan's been here for 10 years and she has always been exceptional, but the last few times I've allocated staff, X, Y and Z has happened. It's outside of character. So you can escalate that so that that underperformance can be further explored. So that's the first motivating theory, the Pygmalion effect. By nature of the expectations that you set, you drive performance. If you have low expectations, people match it, and that you have a demotivating effect, just subtly with the way in which you're demonstrating the way in which you're allocating patients and sending messages. The next is a triangle of a few concepts about the way in which people their core motivation. Again, there's many a theory, but this is McClelland's human motivation theory. And if we consider a situation where you might be in charge of a ward and you've got one bed left in the ward, and the after-hours coordinator has called you and said, I need to fill that bed. And you really have looked hard at your patient allocations as they stand at the moment, and you know there's only one person you can give that patient to, and it's a bad deal. It's just a bad deal, and you feel like you're really doing them a disservice by going up to them and saying your workload is terrible, but it is less terrible than everybody else's, and I need to give you this patient. So the question is, how do you sell it? How do you sell someone a bad deal? This is one of the ways that you can use it. You can do it through this McClelland's human motivation theory. It's about crafting your allocations and crafting the way in which you deliver certain things by seeking what people's dominant motivators are. And you can quietly use these motivation for any number of things, not just selling a bad deal, but also rewards, recognition, feedback, everything that you can do. The way in which you engage with this person is an important way to function and craft the way you deliver that message. So if we explore McClelland's human motivation theory, his theory was that outside physiological and safety needs, those things that make up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that human beings have three main needs. A need for affiliation, or a need for achievement, or a need for power. Each person behaves differently and is triggered differently according to each motivator. So if we have a look at achievement first, these people have a strong need to set and accomplish challenging goals. They take calculated risks to accomplish their goals. They like regular feedback on their progress and their achievements. They often like to work alone. So if I think of a particular person about who fits this, in particularly with nursing, the people that have a need for achievement are the really strong patient advocates. For them, it is all about the patient. They really want to give the best patient care. They're really embodied by the fact that basic cares are met and their patients are well fed and they're well watered and they're walked and they're happy and they're tucked up in bed and they've got their nurse call and they've been communicated with, and that to them is an achievement. They're really strong on what the patient's experience is and how they can deliver exceptional patient care and exceptional patient outcomes. Those who have a need for affiliation are those that want to belong to the group. They want to be liked. They'll often go with whatever the rest of the group wants to do. They favour collaboration over competition. They don't like high risk, they don't like uncertainty, and they really, really thrive on the camaraderie of a team. That is their key motivation, is that it's all about the team for them. Again, for patients, in the nursing sector, you can really see those particular people, particularly in a ward sector. We really have a strong propensity for seeing those people that are, they're the ones that have always got a story. They're always in the nurses station. They're really, really strong with the social club, and they know what's going on in everyone's life, and they really, really have a strong connection with the team. Not to say that they're not motivated by patient care, but for them, it's one of the motivating things to turn up to work is to be with their people. Power. The power want control, and they want to influence people. They love competition and they love winning. They enjoy status and recognition. And that status and recognition and that need for power can be divided into two main groups, personal and institutional. Those with institutional power motivators have loved to organise teams and further the organisational goals. They're the people that really speak up in meetings. And they always turn up to the meeting. They take control even when they're not in charge. They can't keep their fingers out of the controlling pie. And they delegate really easy. They're really comfortable with getting people to where they need to be, how they need to do it, and when they need to do it. When you're dealing with each of these, then you start to intuitively know who each of those people are. If you had a look at your roster when you go to work next and you just go down the list and you divided them up, you'll generally be able to see, yeah, they're the CHEDMET people. They're here for them. It's all about the patient and best patient care. Yep, they're here for the team. They love the camaraderie. They love the team. They love the social. And the power. It's a dirty word, but there are some people who really thrive on that, power, control, influence. They're natural born leaders. The trick is developing the motivator for them and using that for where you want to take it. So when you're dealing with someone who's got their dominating motivator is that need for achievement, then you need to start thinking about the fact that they need challenging patients. They thrive on overcoming problems. They really get satisfaction out of having a really complex patient and getting to the end of the shift and really, really nailing their patient care, really turning them around from a drastic deterioration. They're kept engaged by really high acuity, high complexity. They prefer primary nursing over team nursing. When you're giving them feedback, they have a strong desire for fair and balanced feedback, and they want to know what is right and what is wrong about their approach. So when you look at our scenario, then you need to sell it to them in terms of that they're the only one that can do it. They're the only one that have the clinical capability that you can trust for you to be able to deal with it. Everyone's load is terrible. Their load is less terrible than everybody else's. You need to give them that one last patient for the rest of their shift. And you can even frame that in terms of that you are so grateful it is them who is on, because their clinical prowess, their ability to nail that patient care is so good, and you'd be in real trouble otherwise. One of the key things about using the need for achievement is framing it in such a way to say the patient needs you. This patient needs your care. It really needs that, making it about the patient. For those with the affiliation, these people work best in teams and work best in groups. They don't like uncertainty. They don't like risk. They like to keep it safe. They like to keep it predictable. When you're giving them feedback, their feedback should be personal, and it should emphasise their good working relationships with the team, the excellent communication skills that they have, your trust in them and their ability to deliver a great clinical setting and a great team to give that great patient care. They don't like to stand out. So when you're celebrating their successes, standing up in a staff meeting and saying, oh, Jane did really, really well last week and, she's been a performer, they hate that. They really hate that being out. It, to them, makes them feel outed and exposed in amongst their people and their team. In our scenario where you're trying to sell them a bad deal by taking on yet another patient, then you have to sell them to them in the context that their team needs them to step up. Now that they have control over their patient allocation and nothing else can upset their apple cart as well, it makes it a little less risky. When they've got an extra bed in there, if they're looking after beds 1 to 5 and bed 5 is empty, they don't like risk and they don't like uncertainty. So the fact that bed 5 could be anything from a self-caring 18-year-old with a rumbling appendix right through to an unstable acute coronary syndrome, then you want to sell it to them in terms of at least there's no risk and at least there's no uncertainty. So, but the most important thing is for them to sell it to them that it's all about the team and the team needs them to do that. When you're dealing with someone and you're trying to get someone to function whose motivating need is power, they work best when they're in charge. They enjoy the competition, they enjoy that challenge, and they do well with goal-orientated tasks. They're effective in negotiations, and where someone can be convinced of something for an idea or a goal. So it's often really helpful to be able to use them to use your as a negotiating tool. If they're a better negotiator than you, then you can use their skills when you need to. When you're using giving them feedback, then they really want direct feedback, and it's often centred around their opportunity for career advancement. They want to be noticed by an executive team or by the executive. So in our scenario, how are you going to sell it to them? You need to sell it to them in the fact that they're getting a raw deal, it's terrible, but it won't go unnoticed. And that you even say to them, that their efforts and their contribution will be escalated so that people know and that it will be duly recognised, and it's about them building the brand in the organisation for their career. Okay. So next. Now that you know about the Pygmalion effect and that you understand that McClelland motivating factor, so your expectations and the messages that you are sending to an individual drives performance, and when you need to push them into where you need to go, how to use those motivating factors, at the end of the day, it's all about that thank you. And how do you thank someone without it sounding trite? I think we've all been in the situation where maybe you've got to the end of your shift and the patients were just nightmarish. You honestly get to the end and you do not know how you got through that shift. It was just truly terrible. You had more patients than what was reasonably expected of you, and at the end, those patients are fine. They're perfect, they're well cared for, they're pain-free, they're on their right clinical trajectory. You pick up your bag and it's 11 p.m. and you say to them, the team leader says to you, thanks for your help tonight. And it just feels like one effort does not match the recognition of that empty platitude. On the other side of that coin is you're in charge and you know that there's one nurse who has been seriously irritated by her workload. You're not sure if she's just tired or stressed or genuinely feels hard done by, but at the end you want to express how grateful you are to the effort that she's made and that she's really stepped up and delivered. You approach her and you say, I just want to say how grateful I am that you did for everything you did tonight. And you look at the face and you just know it falls on deaf ears. For some reason, that just did not land. It's really tricky. People don't seek at the end of those two scenarios, they don't seek a compliment. They actually seek acknowledgement. And there's a massive difference between a compliment and acknowledgement. If I give you an example, if I was to say to someone, that's a beautiful top that you're wearing, as opposed to you really exhibit great dress sense. Those two things are really saying the same thing, that I like the top you're wearing. But one thing is about the fact that you went out and you bought a top that was designed by someone else that's beautiful, and the other one says that you made a beautiful decision with what you're wearing and it's great. An acknowledgement is something that's quite different to a compliment in the way in which that it's structured, and the effect that it can have. It can catalyse an action when someone receives an acknowledgement as opposed to a compliment. It requires an observation of the individual actions that your team member displayed. It is unconditionally constructive. It helps reframe sometimes what the person is thinking or feeling. It supports better behaviour and articulates support and confidence. The formula for constructing an acknowledgement as opposed to a compliment is you always have to start the sentence with you as opposed to I. In fact, the word I can be eliminated from the entire sentence. It always focuses on strengths. It is, again, unconditionally constructive. It's direct and it celebrates what they have done. So on one hand, you might say, I think you did a great job tonight, thanks. But actually, an example of how to acknowledge that person as opposed to compliment them might be one of these. Your time management skills tonight were just exceptional. It made all the difference to how this shift ran. You managed that unstable patient with absolute precision. Your ability to cope with an unreasonably high workload is astonishingly good. You dealt with that difficult situation with that family with care and empathy. You've turned that situation around from what was likely to be a major complaint into a family that felt truly heard. To a graduate, you might say, you managed a full and complex patient load tonight that I would expect a senior expert nurse to struggle with. Congratulations. It actually focuses on exactly what their behaviour and what they displayed, and is unconditionally constructive. There's no, but don't forget, you need to go to tea on time. There's none of that. It is just a sentence that delivers what they did and how it made an impact, and it's always about with the word you in it and never with the word I. It's also really important to remember that timing is really important too. Grand finals last weekend, you'll notice that the fans were not silent through the entire match and celebrating only at the end when the game was done. They actually cheered for every single good play, whether the team was winning or losing. And that even when the result was bad, there was still a celebration of their achievements. And it is exactly the same thing when you're leading a shift. To say it at the end after it's all said and done is maybe not the best time because everyone's tired, they just want to get out of there, they've had a frustrating shift. There's always an opportunity at the time when it happens to be able to deliver that acknowledgement. And it's a great, using this with timing and using an acknowledgement as opposed to a compliment is a great way of combining the Pygmalion effect. So you can start to deliver subliminally some message about what your expectations are through that. Particularly with a sentence that starts with what I want for you, as opposed to what I want from you. It is an acknowledgement of what you see in the future for them and how you really want them to be if they were the best version of themselves. So it's a great way, that combination of what I want for you is a way to share expectations and ideas without expressing condemnation. And it helps us set attainable standards without feeling a burden or a pressure. So for a graduate, you might say to them, what I want for you is to feel like you've finished your shift after comfortably managing your full patient load of 4 patients and like you nailed your time management. That acknowledgement that you're acknowledging that they are capable of doing that, and you've also set some clear expectations without any judgment in it, like you're not doing that at the moment. So you've not said where they are at, but they understand that that's what you want for them. That's what you hope that they're able to achieve. and you're able to set an attainable goal and standard without pressure and without burden. It's really important to remember that it's not what I want from you, it's what I want for you. Finally, it's all about, as I said before with the grand final, it's about the celebration and how to reward people. Now, there's lots of ways that you can reward people, and often the most intrinsic reward of a simple thank you that it is delivered well and it acknowledges their performance and acknowledges their skill is actually mostly what people want. They want acknowledgement that they've done a good job and not an empty platitude at the end of their shift. So in terms of reward, that is often, most often, enough. But there's lots of things that can extend beyond that for exceptional performance. A lot of hospitals now have put together resources for the way in which they can acknowledge their staff. So understanding what those are is really important. But at the time, there are lots of things that you can do at the time to reward staff, and even coming up to them and saying, I've just rung the hospital coordinator to get extra support here so that we can give you a hand, and because you're clearly struggling or you've done such a great job with your workload tonight, I think you can do with, you know, just a bit of a hand now at the end, is a way in which you reward their solid, unending effort without complaint. If you can't get a nurse, maybe you can get an orderly to come and give them a hand. That in itself is a reward for recognising the fact that they're working hard and they're not whinging about it. You can take on some of their load. The other thing you can do is later, after the shift, escalate to the nurse manager that you feel that they would, fabulous, or suggest that they would benefit by accessing some extra resources because they're clearly demonstrating, you know, a great clinical trajectory in terms of their development and where they're going with their performance. And that might be training and development. Training and development is an opportunity, not necessarily something that has to be used as a punishment or a performance management technique. It is something that you can use to reward people as well. Time is a great way to reward people. And even in terms of setting your expectations around time. Some people are really, really, really efficient people, and when really efficient people are in a team leading seat, they expect people to meet their time management expectations. They expect that you should be able to get task A, B, C and D done. I'd get it done in 15 minutes. I'll give you 20, and when it's not done in 30, then you start to, you know, get a bit naggy about what's going on. Giving people the time that they need as well as the resources to be able to perform their role to the best of their ability is an important way to reward staff. So if it's not going to impact the flow of the ward and they need 2 hours to be able to do that, then you shouldn't be there harping on about how they should have done it half an hour ago. Giving them the time and the resources to be able to do their job well is a way that you can reward staff. Pushing timeframes on other people is a great demotivator. It hampers their creativity. It eliminates their mindfulness. All of a sudden they're thinking about how they've got to do it in this time and not necessarily in this quality. And it's often over long term will generate burnout. So you need to find that fine balance point when you're giving people the time and the resources, but from a time point of view, enough time so that you're not demotivating them, but giving them time frames around what works for the ward so that it doesn't derail the way in which the shift runs. Access to help and expertise is a great way to reward staff, particularly newer staff, novice and intermediate staff, in terms of access to help and expertise that may take the form of a preceptor or a mentor or an expert. It fosters collaboration with absolutely no agenda or judgment, and it is a really great way to foster those younger intermediate staff into being great clinicians, that you give them the opportunity to find mentorship with someone else. You make that happen. And you can say to them, it's an acknowledgement by saying to them, you are demonstrating a really great capacity beyond your current level of experience. And to really consolidate that, I think you would find it really helpful to mentor with this person. She can offer you X, Y, and Z. Sharing your lessons learned with people is a great way of acknowledging their growth and development as well. I know that I learned more from my disasters and mistakes than I ever did from my wins. I think we all have our horror stories of our moments of truth, and novice and intermediate staff really gain trust and gain excellent benefit from being able to hear those stories as well. And of course, feedback is a great way of acknowledging people and celebrating. I have to work out what your team's happy dance is. When you've had a really tough winter and it has been the worst flu season that you've seen in years, what is your ward as a group going to do to celebrate the fact that you've given great care? Australia delivers incredible care. In fact, we're the envy of a lot of OECD countries in terms of our patient outcomes. And every single nurse that works in every single facility in service in this country contributes to that. So we are doing an exceptional job. And there are stresses and there are complexities and there are really terrible times, but for the most part, we deliver exceptional patient care. So what is it? How are you going to celebrate that as a group so that you can have a happy dance about how good your patients are cared for? Your social club is an exceptional way of doing that. Drinks on a Thursday night, a picnic in a park on a Saturday, you can have a mini golf day. Maybe on one particular shift that's really tough, instead of everyone bringing in their meals for the evening, you're going to order pizzas instead, and everyone's going to have pizzas in the tea room together. As a team leader, you can often give people a long lunch break, particularly when acuity is a bit lower or activity is a bit lower. What does it matter if everyone has an hour lunch break instead of their usual half an hour? You can send them home early and pay them for that. It is tricky. There are a few HR and IR considerations about when you put people on the road at 1 o'clock in the afternoon instead of 3:30. But nevertheless, there is an opportunity for you to be able to do that, and most timekeeping, records keeping systems that are being used in the hospital has the functionality to pay people for goodwill. And you can organise a night duty staff member to start a couple of hours early so that the afternoon nurse that's been, flogged for shift after shift after shift can go home a couple of hours early. There's lots and lots of things. Hospitals have got great recognition and reward programs with movie vouchers and coffee and cake vouchers and bottles of wine. Those people that are the power motivators are clearly going to be exhilarated by a letter from the executive team acknowledging what they have done and their high performance. Creating a wall of fame in the tea room for outstanding clinical outcomes or excellent individuals. Nominating people for the Employee of the Month. Writing a handwritten note as the team leader to the person that you really felt has made a difference. There are lots and lots of ways that you can thank and celebrate people that is beyond just, hey, thanks for your effort tonight, it was great. I've put together a little webinar pack as usual. In that is the slides of this presentation, as well as a bit more information about the Pygmalion effect and the McClelland's human motivator theory. And there's also a little self-test, a link to a self-test on my website about how fundamentally good, bad or indifferent you are to be able to motivate your team, and that assesses where your deficits are and where you may be able to concentrate on developing some skills in that area.
Nicole, thank you very much for a great presentation. If you're attending this session live and you'd like to put a question to Nicole, just click on the question icon, type your question into the box and click send, and that will go through to her. Nicole, Cheryl's commented here in regards to other members of the team can become resentful at other members of the team carrying a reduced workload because of their perceived level of incompetence or competency.
The nursing collective, as I often call them, are quite a powerful force. It's a real force to be reckoned with. But not all nurses are equal and not all nurses are at the same level. That's why we have level 1 grade 2 and level 1 grade 8. And it's important as a leader that the leader is able to deal with that with care and empathy for the person that is struggling and coming, and that there is some growth. And the nursing collective gives those people the opportunity, every opportunity that they can, to improve their performance. But at one point or another, often, in a vast minority, then it turns into a performance management issue and it ends in termination. So I think there's that scale where opportunity needs to be given that that underperforming individual has the opportunity to improve, and then when that is exhausted, then the manager has the capacity and tenacity to warm it up and terminate them if that's what's required. I think it's in that phase where it's beyond a joke and they're just languishing, where that resentment comes in.
Yes, certainly, and as Cheryl just identified, and so often managers struggle with that concept of having to bite the bullet.
It's a tough gig, and I think there's lots of fear around the Industrial Relations Commission, an unfair dismissal, and making sure that you have got every single duck lined up perfectly to make sure that you're protected. It's not a nice process emotionally to sit down with someone and say, if you don't improve, I need to let you know your employment may cease. And, just watch the colour drain from someone's face if they realise that they're in, hot water here. It's not nice, and it takes an enormous amount of intestinal fortitude. But there's no other option. You've got to do that.
True. I love the concept of what's your team's happy dance. I think that should be Management 101, trying to define what your team's happy dance is. And the other concept that I think you articulated was there is a huge difference between complimenting someone and acknowledging the tough shift that you had and their ability to be able to still deliver during that shift. And that makes a marked difference. Yeah, it does. It's really hard when I think you've worked really, really hard, and it's an anticlimax when you get a compliment that is well-meaning, but it just doesn't seem to match the really hardcore effort that you've put in, and you think, okay, and you sort of walk out a bit deflated. And it's hard for the team leader who really wants to be able to say, wow, thanks for everything that you've done, and not have spent some time considering what the difference between a compliment and an acknowledgement is. It is, yeah. I recommend Nicole's site to you, www.nursemanagerhq.com/reward is where you will find the webinar pack that she has put together for today's session, but on her website you will also find some great resources available to you. Nicole, thank you very much for a great presentation. My pleasure. To everyone who's listening, I wish you an absolutely exceptional day, and I look forward to seeing you online at another webinar very soon. Goodbye.